For those who probably weren't of this generation of TV watchers, it's hard to emphasize how much of a miracle this show was, and perhaps I'm looking at it with rose tinted glasses, but when I was a high school kid during the original run of Cowboy Bebop within the US, it was like the year 2001, it was kind of the perfect timing, the right show at the right moment, because up until then, anime in the US was pretty tame, right? I think it was basically Dragon Ball and like Dragon Ball Z and Pokemon. And Dragon Ball Z might have been considered mature content for its time, but definitely not in the US because when they dubbed that show, they got rid of a lot of the mature themes and they erased all the blood. So it looked like a pretty standard kids show with fighting with energy balls. Who doesn't like that? And then Pokemon is Pokemon. So there really wasn't any content for, I guess, a more adult maturing audience. Like I said, high school age kids. And up until then, too, Cartoon Network really hadn't done much of that, I don't believe. I used to watch Cartoon Network late at night all the time. And I can tell you, ever since the 90s, it was Space Ghost Coast to Coast, which I had no idea what was going on with that show. I think I was just too young to appreciate it at that point. And like Hanna-Barbera reruns, it was nothing. I still loved Cartoon Network. It was great. It's just, it seemed like I was aging out of it. And then all of a sudden, Adult Swim happened. And when it happened too, I'm sure there was some kind of marketing push, but again, I was a young kid and I don't pay attention to that kind of stuff. And the internet was laughable at that point, right? No one had a smartphone, I don't think, at that point. No, definitely not. So the show was a complete and utter surprise to, I imagine, a lot of people. And it just blew me away. I mean, even within Adult Swim, it was perfect window dressing because Adult Swim started off with pretty lighthearted fare. It was like C-Lab 2020, Aqua Teen, I think the Brack Show, or that might have debuted later. But these were all what I would call like stoner comedies. They really weren't sophisticated at all. It just sounded like a bunch of people like got high and recorded stuff and then put it to animation, like old animation that they redubbed over. And it was funny. It was cool. It was entertaining, very lighthearted, but I didn't really expect much else out of this Adult Swim. And then at midnight, I remember there being a Cowboy Bebop title card. There's just I think it was just white text with a black background. And the very first episode played, and the very first episode plays without a cold open or anything. It was just starting off with Tank, just in your face. And from that moment on, I was completely hooked on the show. And it's because I was so hooked on that show that I really did want to avoid any news about this Netflix adaptation. In fact, I wasn't even really intending on watching it, just because I thought my strategy for defending something I love so dearly is to stick my head in the ground like an ostrich and just wait for it to pass. Hope that it's good, or wait till I hear some kind of positive thing about it, and then maybe I'll watch it. If not, I'll just ignore it and pretend like nothing ever happened. Like Death Note.
I thought I had it all together, but I was led astray. The day you walked away, you were the clock that was ticking in my home. Changed my state of mind.
Ladies and gentlemen.
But, Cowboy Bebop is different for me. Again, it was the right time in my life, and it's just something that, even though it hasn't been top of mind for a really long time, it is something that I really did enjoy, and I can't help it. I'm gonna watch it. Though, yeah, I'm gonna watch it. And unfortunately, it might break my heart. It might be horrible. But here's hoping that something good comes from it. So with that said, I guess I want to start talking about some of the other things leading up to this opener. Some of the things I tried to avoid up until now, but now I feel kind of have all come to a head now that I've watched this opener.
Get everybody in the stuff together. Okay, 3, 2, 1, it's
The first one is overall costume design. I've heard this criticism levied a lot, but it really does look like they are cosplayers. And I understand when it comes to wardrobe, it's kind of a double-edged sword, because you really do have to toe the line between paying deference to the original, like you have to bring up these iconic outfits at some point. But at the same time, and this is a live action adaptation, you can't have them wear the same outfit all the time, are you? Like a cartoon? That's what they do in cartoon. I know this was adapted. This is adapted from a cartoon, but this is going to be live action. Anyway, the other thing that I wanted to address that goes with this is the main character, Spike, right? So John Cho, who's going to be playing Spike in this show. And I know there's been some controversy about his age, which, honestly, I don't really care too much about. I think he can handsome his way out of it. He's a handsome looking dude. He's representing for all the Asian men out there. Representation for us in media is pretty grim, so I'll take the win. But the thing that concerns me though about his age is just understanding the characters, especially when you compare him in comparison to Jet, who I think the actor Mustafa Shakir, he's like 43 years old, and John Cho is decidedly more than 53. It just seems weird that the two characters who I feel like the relationship and their age is so important that it's kind of flip-flopped in this. And it does make some of the wardrobe decisions strange too. Like the one that bothers me the most, I think, is the suit. Because it's a very stylish take on the original, and the thing that I think defined Spike so much was just how he just didn't care about anything. I mean, that goes with that effortless cool that he had, right? And he's always doing cool things like smoking and leaning on things, which is what you do when you're cool. But he was also the definition of kind of artfully disheveled. His collar's all popped and wrinkly, his tie is all askew, and his suit jacket is left open. I mean, it's a futuristic-y looking suit, but it basically looks like a double-breasted jacket that he just doesn't care to button up all the way, and it's just kind of flopping open. Again, this kind of just carefree attitude that he kind of portrays. And then this adaptation, they still have the askew tie, they still have the ruffled, yellow shirt, but then they have this like beautifully, perfectly pressed blue suit. It just seems a really weird contrast when, like, what does he care or does he not care? I know it's a weird minor detail, but when your character is this kind of has this cavalier attitude with himself, his like sense of safety and his clothing, and then you just make one of those items like really clean and really neat, just looks weird. And also on top of that, and this is where the age thing kind of comes in, is that, I love John Cho, but unfortunately with that really nice suit and everything else just kind of disheveled, he looks like that old guy at the club who's kind of aging out of the club. It looks a little try hard, and that's unfortunate, because that should not be the read for Spike, and it does worry me. But again, I just gotta hope that John Cho can figure out a way to mitigate that kind of interpretation. But while we're going on to that, I did want to talk about the others, like Jet. So Jet's age concerns me because that's kind of his character too, right? He's a retired cop turned bounty hunter, And I suppose you can make some revisions to his story, but if you are gonna mirror the original show in any sense, you're gonna have to hit some certain story beats with Jet, and I feel one of them has got to be his police career. So you kind of need to be an older guy. Also, I understand that there are some controversies about race swapping within all of the characters. That one I don't care so much. I can understand people where they're concerned or annoyed because it's like this cast is now like a diversity poster. But these are all characters in the future. I don't think any of their races were ever made explicit in the show. Uh, so yeah, I mean, have fun with it. Who cares? As long as the characters look somewhat convincing. I think the only one that had any kind of argument behind it was Faye Valentine, because in her video there's like she's some Singapore or something like that, which I guess would make her more likely than not ethnically Chinese. And that would have been really cool to have like two Asian leading characters. But it doesn't hurt me terribly that they recast her as not. Same thing with Jet. Really, the only thing I cared about Jet was that he'd be old and yoked. Because that's kind of who he was. And I guess you don't have to make him jacked. Like, it's fine. But for me, it was just the age thing that was kind of more important, because he was this kind of parental figure. He was the old codger that the people would tease. He was their rock, right? Running rock. So it just seems a little odd. But the thing that upsets me most about Jet in watching this opener, in looking at some of the teaser images for the show, is and is anyone even talking about this? Is anyone talking about Jet Black's arm? I don't think I've read anything about it, but that arm is the least convincing metal arm I've ever seen. And I understand that shows have budgets. Like, this is a Netflix series, this is not a Marvel film, but metal arms, I feel, have been done to death. Like, there are metal arms everywhere that I can think of. I can think of a lot of metal arms. I feel the science behind metal arms at any kind of studio budget level should be like down pat at this point. Like, who doesn't know how to make metal arms? And I mean, I don't think there's enough visual information in that quote unquote metal arm to read as metallic. And again, I know these are teaser images, but because these are teaser images, they should have been pretty well handled in post-production, I would hope. Like, if I look at that metal arm, or I'll bet you this, if you went down to, like, I live in Los Angeles, if you drove up to K-Town and you grabbed some Asian auntie off the street and you showed her an image of that metal arm and go, what do you think of that? I don't think they could understand that as metal. Like, I think they would look at that and go, oh, that man is just trying to protect his driver's side arm while he goes grocery shopping. It does, what it looks like, it kind of looks like cake fondant, right? Like, and maybe this is because of the pandemic, but I've seen my fair share of baking show challenges, but that arm looks like a very realistic cake. And that's not a great way to start off. I mean, there's really not much visual distinction between his metal arm and like his ballistic knee pads, unless those are supposed to be metal too, or his leather glove, unless that's also a metal glove. I'm worried that during one of the scenes they're gonna shoot his arm, and it's gonna penetrate right through that fondant, and it's gonna expose 3 layers of delicious red velvet cake. Although, if I think about that now, I think that would be actually a pretty great show. Like, that's how they introduced the very next season of the British baking show. Like like little Paul comes walking out, and he just like cuts a wedge out of Jet's arm and just comments on how delicious tasting it is, how rich and chocolate it is while still being distinctly red velvet. Anyway, I digress. I'm sure Jet's cake arm will be fine. I just have to hope they bust a Sonic the Hedgehog and they just fix it up later and it no longer looks like it's made of cake. Going on, let's go on to Faye Valentine because I think that's the one that actually has real controversy, not just made up stuff that I'm talking about. And I understand the passions on both sides of this. But one, so her outfit in this, I don't know, this looks like Wanda Maximoff. I guess I don't really have a huge objective or objection on that per se. But and I understand the other arguments where they say that Faye's original outfit is problematic, right? Because it is. I mean, anyone who's seen the show, it's pretty ridiculous even for anime standards. But before we like throw everything through the woke filter of our modern society, I think it is important to kind of really understand what her character is. And again, this is my concern with every single one of these characters, is that these wardrobe decisions or these character direction decisions seem to run counter to what these characters are. So Faye Valentine is like honey trap incarnate, right? I mean, that was her whole shtick. That's how she bounty hunts, right? She looks as helpless and as tempting as humanly possible to a man, to have them drop their guard, and then she pulls a gun on them. That's how she does her thing. And in fact, it's actually a great window to her psychology as well. I mean, it shows her intelligence. She's beautiful. She's got these ridiculous proportions, and she knows it, and she takes advantage of it. And it plays to her psychology because when she came out of cryo, she was duped by some handsome con man. And in a twisted way, that kind of shaped her own game when she eventually started fending for herself. I mean, she is the most really pessimistic characters in the show when you originally meet her. And her worldview informs her outfit. Like, she dresses that way because that's what she thinks men want. That's what she thinks, these terrible people want, and she's going to give that to them to take advantage of them. So in that sense, her costume and her character are inexorable. It's not just a fan servicey, waifu pillow kind of thing, even though it really, really looks that way. So from that sense, I am worried because this new outfit, I guess, just looks like your generic action woman, and that's well and fine too. And I'm willing to see what they do and change with each of these characters. Like, maybe they'll make Spike older for some reason. Maybe Faye has a completely different backstory that's also compelling, but I'm just worried because while I do think it's great that they are empowering women's roles in movies, I do think it's a bit of an overcorrection at times. No one likes a Mary Sue, and I think what true equality, in casting looks like is not all the women being badass fighty people or being better than men. It's just being the same. It's the same thing with representation in movies as well. I talk about how Asian representation in film is just awful, but what I think true equality is not just Asian men leading in every movie and Asian women. It's just like an Asian guy being cast just as a dude, You know, like there's just a scene where it's kind of like a Bechdel test, but for ethnicities, right? It's like, no, this guy is Asian not because the plot requires it. It's just we cast an Asian guy. I don't know. Anyway, and then Faye's character is so strong already in the direction that it was originally intended. I don't understand the take that they're doing now, but again, I will kind of withhold judgment. Now with all that controversy stuff aside, I guess I've been trying to avoid it, but let's get into talking about the actual opener. All right. Okay, the initial read after watching it the whole way through is I can't shake the feeling that everyone in this opener looks like they're trying way too hard. And this is a problem. When I watch this, and this is not trying to be a jerk about it, but it does genuinely look like this was a guild of cosplayers that won some kind of Cowboy Bebop's greatest fans contest. You know, some gimmicky thing where they enter all their cosplay costumes and they get selected and they get to fly out to Japan or something and walked in the original studio and talked to some of the original showrunners. But then right as they're about to go home, they get the surprise that they are going to get to shoot their own live action version of the opening title sequence with their own original costumes. And they are so pumped, they are so amped about this that once they start filming, they are so concerned with looking as cool and badass as possible that they kind of miss the point. And to their credit, they are a cosplay guild, they're not actors. But that's kind of the mood I'm getting out of this. And mood and character setup is entirely what this opener originally was. So it is concerning that I don't seem to see that level of understanding, and I don't seem to see just the right attitude when it comes to this sequence. Now, the first moment with Spike, it's fine because it's more or less a remake. To this point though, I'm actually surprised they showed the smoking. I mean, smoking is such a pivotal part of all of these characters. They are quite the cast of chain smokers, but living in the times that we live in now, I was actually kind of surprised that Netflix just went ahead and did it. But of course they would have to, especially with that opener. But right after that though is where I start to really worry about the characters of the show, because in the original Spike's intro photo is kind of perfect. He has this nonchalant swagger about him. He's got this mischievous smirk as he's kind of smiling back and looking. He's carefree. And that's the facade that Spike puts up when you first meet him. I don't know if carefree is the right word, but or maybe it's even like disinterested. He doesn't care what you think, and he's just doing his own thing, and he's getting the thrills whatever way he can. You know, he's a bounty hunter. He's a space cowboy living on the fringes of society. It's a great setup, a great intro photo. If I look at the live action, it's just John Cho, like looking really, he's like mean mugging the camera. He's just looking really intensely. Like, okay, we'll see. Then there's a image of Jet giving what I can describe as a cool face. He's like, right? Like, I'm Jet. I mean, look how cool I am. And in the original, it's actually like glimpses of Faye's character, but I'll get to that later. But when Jet does show up in the original, it's actually him kind of silhouetted in repose. And then there's like a image of him all small running. And then the final image of him is him just really stern, kind of dead-eyed and aiming his gun. Like everything about this, there seems to be a very kind of stern, stoic, and serious nature about this character when we first meet him. And again, it's another great setup to who he is revealed to be when the show airs. And Mustafa's just working with what I'm sure the directors told him to do, but it's his intro is basically just, hey, look, I'm Jet. I'm cool. And then there's more things where he's flipping switches and stuff. Like, hey, I'm Jet the pilot. Okay. And then we have Faye in an action pose with like a push blade. What's going on with that? Like, are they gonna make her a knife lady? That's a trope in anime that was refreshingly missing from the original, and I'm really wondering if they're gonna go this way. They're placing a lot of emphasis on her with that knife and action poses. Like, is she gonna be a knife lady, and Spike's gonna be the guy with the gun, and Jet is gonna use his metal arms or arm? I don't know. That's what I liked about the original. They all had guns. They all flew ships with various levels of competence. They weren't kind of lumped into these different like RPG roles. Anyway, she's a badass knife lady now. So I'll see how that goes. But the original, once again, it just really set up the character perfectly. Her intro, by the way, is not her face. It's her legs in high heels, portraying her as a sex object first. Even the first image of her face, she's wearing sunglasses, looking down. You only see her lips and a lit cigarette. It's the perfect femme fatale archetype, right? She's showing you exactly what she wants you to see. You don't get to see a glimpse of her character. That is something that she guards very dearly. You're only seeing the honey trap. And then we get to what I find most troubling about the live action title sequence, and that's the insertion of the show footage. And on a couple levels, like on a technical note, I'm no cinematographer, but a lot of those shots just don't really seem that interesting or dynamic, first off. But also just the fact that they're there at all. The original had nothing, which is pretty great. It really gave nothing away, even though it laid out all the main characters, like I just mentioned. There was clearly a lot of love for machines and ships and guns that are interspliced through it, and you can tell the art team was really proud of what they put together, and the director clearly loved those creations. And from what I gather, the original show was actually made to sell toys of spaceships, if you can imagine. And knowing that little fun fact, it's incredible the show was ever made. I think it was shelved for a while because the show was just so intense. Like, could you imagine being the head of Mattel and being like, I want to sell spaceships, and someone delivers to you Cowboy Bebop? You're like, what in God's name are you doing? But again, it's everything about this show is kind of a miracle. But there doesn't really seem to be that much love for ships in the live action. That worries me a little bit too. It makes me think that the live action interpretations of the vehicles are going to be pretty weak. And again, it's just that knowledge of knowing that this is a TV show. Albeit Netflix does give large budgets for their shows, it is still a TV show and not a movie. And the ships in the original are incredibly detailed. Their characters in and of themselves too, they feature very heavily in the show. I can't imagine them looking spectacular, and that really worries me. I know there's budget constraints, but if you're gonna tackle a show like this set in space, right, in the future, there's gonna have to be a lot of CG work or a lot of very expensive sets. And I mean, if you can't pull these off, why bother making this show? I find that's a question I'm asking myself a lot these days. Why are you doing this? Look, let's hope I'm wrong. Let's really hope I'm wrong. They probably just omitted all the ship imagery just so they could insert again those live action footage pieces. But again, that's the attitude that worries me, because it really makes me feel like the showrunners don't have a ton of confidence in this show. They're trying to hook you really early by giving away everything, and we know this is a remake. But it's if the showrunners are trying to assure the fan base that's like, look, all right, that scene is going to be there, that character is going to be there, that moment's going to be there. It's okay. Calm down, relax, it'll all be fine. It's going to be great. But this is the double-edged sword that's fan service. I mean, yes, you have to pay tribute to these moments in some way, whether it's a complete, beat for beat remake or a twist. But I'm worried that it's going to be more of the former and less of the latter. And I'm not saying reimagine the entire series, but you know the drill. Like, this is what really good adaptations do, is like every episode within Cowboy Bebop had its own internal plot, but it also developed characters, it drove the overarching plot, it built and added to a very immersive universe. And I feel as long as you touch on those same themes, you hit those same beats in a sense, what's the George Lucas quote? History doesn't repeat, it rhymes. And I know referencing George Lucas might be a bad decision. But if you really have a deep understanding of your source material, you can totally make it work. But writing is hard, and it just makes me feel like, let's just go for the greatest hits. Like that's just what they're thinking of. And I do imagine they are going to make some changes. They're likely going to be very cosmetic and minor, but my worry is when you don't understand your characters and you don't understand the themes that shape your characters, any cosmetic change you make runs the possibility of unintentionally changing the entire meaning or point of a character. And that is a very real problem that I've already discussed with the main characters, but it is likely to happen with other characters, and I am very worried. I will withhold my judgment until I see the show. But for some characters, I am very worried. Yeah. So that kind of ends my take on the opening title. I pray I'm wrong. I'm hoping the show is good, because in the end, I mean, I want it to be good. I'm a fan. I love the original show. And no one wins when a show is terrible. I mean, I guess you can, crap on it for a while, but it would be much better if the show was great. Or even passable. And I'm not one of those people who's so dramatic that they worry that if this series bombs that it's somehow going to taint the original source material. It's not. I just think that if this bombs, the show will be forgotten and it'll never really get its rightful day in the live action spotlight, whether it needs one or not. And it doesn't. But it would be nice. Right? The show's over 20 years old, and if it bombs, I just don't think anyone's going to try to pick it up again. It'll just kind of be lost forever, and that's a shame. I guess maybe the only positive light that could come with this is a renewed interest in the original, which I'm hoping they show on some platform somewhere. I'm sure it's available somewhere. Again, I'm probably reading way too into these two intros. one, I never really analyzed the original that intensely when I first watched the show. It's kind of looking back, and maybe some of the things that I view in this live action opener will make more sense as the show progresses. So again, I do have to withhold complete judgment at this point, but I can understand the groups of people who are worried, because it just seems like there's a fundamental misunderstanding of these characters as a whole, and that's the entire show. Anyway, that's all I've got for now.